All right, good morning everyone. Welcome to Thursday, it's been very foggy for the last few days. It's kind of strange. Spooky even maybe. Um, so tomorrow, as we decided, we'll have our quiz. I think it'll be okay, although Regina's kind of squirming and looking uncomfortable, but it'll be okay. It'll be okay.
So which topic is the quiz?
I think I said class 1 to 9, and so class 9. We were talking about the 1920s, so it's kind of partway through the 1920s.
We're not gonna talk about like racism.
No, I don't think we got there yet. I think that might have been class 10 or so.
But until the Roaring Twenties.
Yeah.
And the Great Depression.
Yeah, well, we haven't really talked about the Depression much either, so it'll probably, yeah, most of it will be on the World War I stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Let's see. Well, let's jump in. So, yesterday we had talked a little bit about Germany. Why is this not working? There we go. We talked a little bit about Germany and why they were experiencing all kinds of political and economic and social problems. It was a pretty unhappy, unstable, probably difficult time to live, right? It was, people had lost their jobs, they didn't have a lot of money. I think we saw in the video, or I don't know if you saw in the video because the video was a bit of a disaster yesterday, but they actually showed at one point people were actually burning money in their stoves. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, the value of money had dropped so low that it was actually cheaper to burn your money than to buy firewood to put in your stove, right? So things are bad when people are burning money because it's cheaper, right? So not good. And there's other pictures from that time where kids are like little kids are playing, and they're playing with like just stacks of bills. Like there's like big stacks of money, and they're just playing with it because it's worthless, right? Like there's millions of marks and they're worth like a cent, right? So their currency is kind of devalued, and it's a really rough time. And we said that's where this guy kind of appears, right? And we talked about him a little bit yesterday. We talked about the idea that he's still very kind of popular in popular discourse, right? We're still referring to him. Nobody talks about Winston Churchill or compares anyone to Churchill. Nobody compares anyone to Neville Chamberlain of the UK. Nobody compares anyone to Stalin, usually. But Hitler comes up all the time, right? And we said that he's a very kind of extreme figure. He did a lot of extreme things, which were kind of notable. He had a big impact on world history. He had a big impact on people's lives, right? And so, yeah, he's, whether you kind of love him or hate him, and I expect most people hate him, he's a very significant character in the story of 20th century. He cannot be ignored, even if you wanted to. Now, I gave you these questions yesterday with that Hitler documentary, but unfortunately, it was very difficult to hear what was going on, and I could not find the original video, and so there was no captions, right? So it was kind of a disaster as a teacher. It was like, oh man, that was awful. So I found another video, and we're going to try it again, okay? And so we'll see if we can get it done this time. Now, I used kind of the same questions, and so the story is the same, right? So hopefully the questions will still be applicable to this new video. If they're not, we'll figure it out, okay? So it'll be okay. One way or the other, we will learn what we need to learn. So again, these questions are in Microsoft Teams. But the video itself, the link is here. And so I know Mir is online, so I'm just going to pop the link into the live chat for Mir or for anyone else who's watching. just so that you have it, because it's a different video than it was yesterday. Again, I hope this one's better. If it's not, it's going to be very embarrassing for me, but it's okay. Sometimes that happens. There we go. Okay, so new Hitler video, same old Hitler, new video, and we'll see if we can kind of pull what we need to out of this one. Okay, that sound okay? All right. So let's watch 25 minutes. There we go. So the link is here. We'll watch the first 25 minutes, then we'll take a break and kind of talk about what we've seen, okay? I'll put the captions up so that will be helpful. So Mir, we'll see you in 25 minutes, okay? We're gonna watch the first 25 here in class too, okay? So see you in a little bit.
So let's say you have to read an incredibly
Okay, so we're hearing some of the things that we already knew, right, about the First World War and sort of the context, but it is kind of interesting to think about what's kind of being argued here, right? Because, you know, it might be tempting for us to think, and maybe once we're done talking about Hitler, maybe we'll think this anyway, but it's tempting to think about him as like the bad guy, right? He did all this stuff. He's the worst. Well, he is the worst. But he's the one who did all this stuff, and it's all him, right? But it's also interesting to think about the context of what's going on in Germany and in German society and in the German Workers' Party itself, right? Because Hitler is not disconnected from the society he lives in. He's part of it, right? And he, you know, just like when we talked about the cause of the First World War, you know, it would be very tempting to say that it was the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, right? That's what set the whole thing off. But is it the only reason for it? No, right? There was lots of underlying causes, and they mentioned a few of them here. And so in talking about what happens in Nazi Germany in the 1930s and during World War II, it's probably worth saying that, yeah, Hitler played a pretty big role in that, right? But he's not the only reason for what happened, right? There's other things going on in the background, and we hear this documentary mention a few of them, right? What's going on in the background? Just really quickly. What's one thing going on in the background, David? Yeah, inflation, right? And people's, you know, inability to kind of be financially successful, to get jobs, to feed their family, right? That's happening. Avatej, what else is in the background? Oh yeah, sure. Regina, what else is in the background here? What's happening in Germany or just kind of around Hitler? Well, inflation and like an economic crisis, right, has occurred or is occurring. Ben, what do you think? The what? What about them? Okay, the party itself is growing. And what's the party kind of like?
Far right.
Yeah, the party itself is pretty far right, right? Pretty racist in its ideology to begin with, right? Hitler joins and kind of says, "Oh, these are my kind of people," right? But still, he finds a group of his kind of people, right? Regina? Yeah, the political instability, right, is there's a chaotic situation that undermines people's belief in democracy. And although they don't make a big deal out of it here, they do mention that Germany kind of starts out as an authoritarian country, right? They have a Kaiser, right? He's kind of a hereditary king, if you will. And so Germany's kind of used to a single ruler, an authoritarian rule. And they get this democracy, but they're not really into it, right? They kind of prefer to have a strongman leader. And of course, when they get a democracy and it doesn't work, everyone's like, of course not. You need a strong leader, dummy. Right? Everybody kind of believes that anyway. So they're not really people that are trying to be or want to be democratic. They kind of like their authoritarian leaders, and now they're kind of stuck with this democracy thing that isn't working, right? I don't know what else is kind of going on here in the background. Yeah, that whole stab in the back thing. They don't like the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and amongst certain groups of people, who gets blamed for that? Yeah, again, this kind of, we've talked about this a little in social justice, but this prejudice against Jewish people that goes back hundreds of years kind of rears its head, right? And in looking for someone to blame, amongst some people, not everybody, but amongst some people, Jewish people get the blame for this, right? Somehow they're in control behind the scenes, right? Making these things happen. And again, pardon me, that's classic conspiracy theory, right? There's lots of conspiracy theories out there now. And again, they're all, regardless of what the details are, they're all the same, right? Somehow people are in control behind the scenes. Nobody knows who they are. It's all very secret. There's no evidence for this, of course, because if there were, then it couldn't happen. But secretly, some people are in control, but nobody knows, right? And again, the details change. Sometimes it's the deep state. Sometimes it's big pharma. Sometimes it's the Jews. Doesn't really matter, right? The details are all the same in many of these conspiracy theories. But you're right. Some people are looking for someone to blame for what happened to Germany at the end of the war, and some people blame the Jews, right? Yeah, so again, it's worth pointing out that, again, yeah, this guy is important, but also the context around him is important as well, right? Because he's not a complete anomaly, right? He's, you know, he grows up, he's kind of a regular kid, you know, not a fantastic student, right? Reads a lot of things that he's interested in, absorbs things very easily, but, you know, not a great student, right? And I can admit that actually that describes me pretty well. Not a great student, but a good reader. I absorb things fairly well. I mean, lots of kids like that out there, right? And so he's kind of, you know, he's a bit of a loner. He seems not to have made friends very easily, right? He's kind of a grouchy person, I think, and people didn't really like him that much. But he's not that, you know, there's nothing purely evil about him, or at least there's nothing that sets him apart. Lots of people are anti-Semitic, right? They have prejudice against Jews. Lots of people are dissatisfied with the German government. Lots of people, you know, yearn for the days when, you know, Germany had a powerful leader to, you know, march forth into history or whatever. He's not really, you know, he fits, right? He fits into that context. He's not so different from everyone else, or at least not so far. You want to take a little break? Whatever. You're easy? You're flexible? Okay. Let's take a little break. We'll come back. We'll watch the rest of this, okay? Is this one a little bit better than yesterday? Same? Easier to understand? Okay. Back in Okay. And we're back. So, oh, the sun's coming out. Awesome. Look at that. Beautiful. Is this a beautiful city? Do you think so? Even though, Ben, you're kind of from here, but do you still think so? Or is it kind of like old news for you? Kind of old news? That's because you haven't lived in a place that isn't beautiful.
I mean, I live in West Nile, so.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah.
That's pretty nice. I don't know. I used to live in Edmonton,
Oh, God.
and Edmonton is flat and cold.
So far, it's basically.
Yeah, it's not that pretty.
Yeah, I went there for a hockey game before.
Yeah. Do you remember where you played? Like what arena?
Not sure. I don't know the name. Yeah.
It's not pretty. It's not a pretty. Nobody goes to Edmonton and says, "Wow, so beautiful."
I did remember there was a thunderstorm that night. So.
Yeah, we do have those. We have some pretty good. You don't really get them here there very much.
Yeah.
Although we had some, I think, last summer, but yeah. I think when it's drier, I think you're more likely to get thunderstorms, I think, anyway. Okay. Anyway, being spammed by the Russians again. Get rid of that. See what I mean? These things keep popping up. These things keep popping up in my live chat. Diana Pagodina. Diana Pagodina. Pagoda is I think it's a garden, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure if that's a real name or not, but anyway, I don't know why the Russians are spamming me, but they are. There's another one. Jeez, go away. Iti otsuda. Okay. Right. Back to Hitler. So here again, I'm trying to make the point here, or I'm asking you to notice that again, yes, we have an individual, but we also have kind of a social and political context here, which is important because again, Hitler is not really, I don't think he's out of place in his society, right? He holds some of the same views. He holds some extreme views that most people don't hold. Yeah, I mean, I don't think doesn't have a lot of friends. I think he's kind of an angry person. Maybe that drives people away a bit, but kind of pretty average, right? But again, he seems to have found a place. He seems to have found a home, right? First in the military, and now in a political party where he's doing PR, right? He's doing propaganda and public relations for them, right? And as we'll find out, or as you may already know, he's actually really good at it. And actually, I think that one of the things he's really good at is branding, right? He's excellent at branding. He names the party. It's got a catchy, short way to refer to it. He gives it a logo, a very simple, distinctive logo. There's a color scheme, right? The red and the white. They all dress in those tan military uniforms, right? So everyone's got a uniform. Like, again, awful person, but he does know his branding, right? And when the Nazis walk down the street with their big banners and their uniforms, everybody knows who they are, right? They're a very visible, visual presence, right? And again, that's a smart thing to do, right? To be able to be seen, to be noticed, right? And to have those symbols associated with you. That's a smart thing. It's a smart thing to do, right? Yeah, so he joins that German Workers' Party. He starts out as a spy, of course, for the army, but then he kind of gets sucked into it, right? They're actually, doing some of the stuff or saying some of the stuff that he agrees with, right? And so he kind of, again, it's weird. He's supposed to spy on them for the army, and then he gets sucked in, and soon he becomes president of the party itself, right? Which is not what he was supposed to do. He had one job, Hitler. He had one job, but he's botched it. So let's go back. Let's watch the rest of this film and see what we see. Okay. Right. Turn that off. Switch sound over.
In a situation of great post-war turmoil in Bavaria and Germany as a whole, rampant inflation, unemployment, street disturbances, strikes, militant political action by workers and by the left. So Hitler was certainly looking for a political home, and he appears to have found one.
Hitler also gathered around him, bit by bit, as his reputation as a speaker of the radical right increased, a group of acolytes, a group of disciples who brought their own particular techniques and their own ideas, personalities and reputation.
Hitler's closest ally at the time was Rudolf Hess, who had been born on April 26, 1894 in Alexandria, Egypt.
Like Hitler, he had this extraordinary reaction at the end, how can we have lost and so on, who was there to blame. He drifted off into university life, but he was a frustrated radical nationalist. And when he met Hitler, he was absolutely transfixed by him.
Hess saw in international politics and this notion of struggle between different races. He was a fanatical admirer of Hitler. As you can see it in the films that were taken of him at Nuremberg rallies, his face just glowing with naive enthusiasm.
The most decorated of Hitler's men was Hermann Goering from Rosenheim, Bavaria, born January 12, 1893.
Goering was an unusual recruit to the infant National Socialist Party.
At that time, in the 20s, a very dashing figure with a big military reputation.
He'd been quite a distinguished Air Force pilot during the First World War.
He had succeeded Baron von Richthofen as head of the von Richthofen squadron after the shooting down of the Red.
Training heroic is for athletes. When we say athletes, we're not just talking.
Baron. So he was an amazingly glamorous figure, and he maintained this astonishing persona of the jolly ex-fighter pilot, which the German people found adorable.
He was not the kind of person who gravitated easily to these radical political movements. But Goering, too, had thought that Hitler somehow or other articulated his own sense of resentment and loss, and became a committed follower from that point on.
One of the party's most sinister figures was Heinrich Himmler, from a Roman Catholic middle-class family, born October 7, 1900 in Munich.
Himmler's father was a teacher who'd been actually tutor to the Bavarian royal family. Himmler had something rather schoolmasterly about him.
Heinrich Himmler's life was really dominated by the fact that he wanted to fight in the First World War, but was too young. You always had that sense with Himmler that he was frustrated in not being able to fight on Germany's behalf.
He had this very pedagogic, kind of scholarly, dreamy manner. Of course, we don't know what was going on inside him.
He was a rather eccentric patriot, strong anti-Semite, and he gravitated towards National Socialism because it seemed for him the natural home.
Martin Bormann became Hitler's most trusted disciple, the son of a post office worker, born June 17, 1900.
Bormann is very much the sinister Machiavellian manipulator, of course.
Very soon joined one of the Free Corps, the vigilante groups that grew up in Germany in the early 1920s, was sent to prison for murdering somebody. When he emerged, he again heard Hitler and thought, well, you know, this man articulates the things I feel, the resentment I feel, the loss in 1918 that all Germans shared, and he too became a devoted follower.
Da kommen die deutsche Mensch, wird nicht nur ein Mensch des Buches.
Finally, arguably the most intelligent of Hitler's men, Joseph Goebbels from the Ruhr Valley, born October 29, 1897.
Goebbels was something of an oddball in the National Socialist movement. He had a university education, he got a doctorate, he studied German literature in the 19th century.
He's also a romantic nationalist and writes a novel before even knowing Hitler called Michael, which is absolutely a description of a Hitler-type figure.
This idea that Hitler had of a Germany where all Germans were united on an equal basis, a very powerful appeal to Goebbels.
And he was looking for a political movement that somehow represented his personal position. He became a good recruit for the National Socialist movement.
And a supreme ability to organize propaganda in the most ruthless possible way.
The common feelings of loss, despair, frustration and anger from losing the First World War united these men. However, these were not uncommon sentiments in Germany at the time. Something else activated and fueled their extremism. All had experienced some kind of revelation whilst listening to Hitler.
He seemed to be an outsider, somebody almost sent to Germany to help Germany regain its trajectory to great power status, to help Germany revenge itself on the Allies.
He was fulfilling a kind of prefigured role which had always existed in German history and culture. Kaiser Friedrich Barbarossa, King Redbeard, the man who would deliver Germany from her enemies, and specifically now those enemies were gathering thick and furious round him.
For Hitler, all the signs were pointing towards a burgeoning National Socialist political party. He had managed to gather around him a loyal following, and some meetings were running into the thousands. It was events in Italy, however, which ignited Hitler's imagination. They would have huge consequences on the fate of Hitler, the National Socialist Party, and the rest of the German nation. Hitler had gathered some of the brightest and most dangerous men from the far right. His National Socialist meetings often brought in around 2,000 participants. But Hitler's perception of himself and his party was grossly exaggerated.
He's the kind of man in a dirty raincoat standing on a soapbox in the middle of a town square talking to half a dozen people.
Standing on platforms, on street corners and so on, old-fashioned kind of political activity.
There were other, far more powerful, far more publicly visible right-wing parties in Germany at the time.
It really was just an assembly of people who come together who shared roughly the same kinds of views.
Events in Italy inspired Hitler.
1922, the bombastic newspaper editor with a gladiator's jaw led his black-shirted legions in a march on Rome.
In October 1922, the fascist leader Mussolini and his black shirt army marched on Rome. King Victor Emmanuel III was forced to hand control of Italy to Mussolini. At least this is how Hitler saw it, and almost immediately began to plot his own coup.
Hitler was very influenced in 1923 by the successful coup staged by Mussolini.
Hitler conceived the idea of a march on Berlin.
So he began to fantasize in 1953 that the German state was so weak, the height of the inflation, the crisis and so on.
He took advantage of the disintegration of German politics in 1923 in the process of hyperinflation, the French occupation of the Ruhr to seize reparations as rightly delivered, to stage a coup d'etat in Munich.
Mussolini was also well aware of the power of propaganda. He knew how he wished to be perceived by the rest of Europe.
Hitler was one of the victims of Mussolini's propaganda. The king appointed Mussolini head of government in a perfectly constitutional way. It was not a coup d'etat. It was a perfectly constitutional act on the part of the king, if a rather weak-willed one.
It was all a bit of a gamble from Hitler's point of view.
On November 8, 1923, Hitler, along with 600 stormtroopers, surrounded the Berger Braukeller, a large beer hall in Munich. Here, the State Commissioner of Bavaria, Gustav von Kahr, was holding a meeting of around 3,000 people. Hitler marched in, fired a shot into the air, and announced that the revolution had broken out and no one could leave. Overnight, Hitler attempted to take power from von Kahr, but failed. It was decided early in the morning of November 9th that they would march out of the beer hall towards the Bavarian Ministry of Defense. On the way, they were confronted by the Bavarian police.
Hitler hoped that the new German army, the post-imperial creation of the Reichswehr, would support them.
It wasn't backed by the army, the industrial elites refused to support it, civil service regarded it with contempt.
When the Munich police opened fire, most of them turned tail. Some of them were hit, some wounded, a few killed. But it was built up into an iconic episode in the history of the movement.
Hitler was arrested. Put on trial.
His trial began on February 26, 1924, and ended on the 1st of April. Other conspirators, such as Rudolf Hess, were also arrested and tried in court. The whole episode seemed to be a complete failure on the part of Hitler and the National Socialist Party.
What the Beerhall Putsch does, which is marvelous for the Nazis, is provide them with martyrs, and provide them with a myth, a legend, and a whole new symbol structure. For example, the blood flag, which is the flag carried on that very day, and when they fought, is after that time the core sacramental edifice of the Nazi process, so that at Nuremberg all of the standards of the stormtroopers are touched by the blood flag. The martyrs are symbolically reburied in vast marble sarcophagi in the center of Munich after the Nazis take power, and every year there is the famous reenactment of the Putsch, where they march down the streets. There is a death watch held throughout Germany the night before. There are radio link-ups. Everything is broadcast. Great films, smoldering beers, flames, the whole work. And if it sounds quasi-religious, it is.
The Nazi flag, the swastika, which Hitler purported to have designed himself, was taken from an ancient symbol embodying early Aryan history.
Well, the swastika is an ancient Buddhist symbol. You see it all over India and China. And it has always been around. It was originally a symbol of the sun. But it began to be acquired by the German right in the late 19th century as one of their symbols, because they felt it stood for the idea of being an Aryan.
It was Hitler's changes to the design which marked it out as the Nazi symbol.
The story he tells is that he invited people to submit designs, and swastikas came in, and none of them, he said, quite did the job, so he said, I'll do it myself, and that's what he worked on. It's a series of simple design formulae which were applied to it.
The flag is in the colours of red, black and white, which are the old imperial colours, to contrast with the red, gold and black of the Republic.
What he did very brilliantly, and I'm much reluctant to say this, it's a fantastic piece of graphic design. He took it, he rotated it to give it a sense of dynamism. He then calculated the widths of the bars very brilliantly. He then set it in this circle, and it doesn't quite touch the edges, which gives it a kind of vibration and dynamism, and then this red outer bit.
So in all the aesthetic, there's a massive amount of red to stand for the Socialist Party.
And it just goes poof. And by the 1920s, it had become the authorized symbol. He said it was going to be the Nazi symbol, and it was the Nazi symbol.
At his trial, Hitler had taken sole responsibility for the putsch. It is reported that the judges found it hard not to acquit Hitler due to their pro-Nazi sympathies. Finally, the sentence of 5 years of confinement was passed. He was also banned from public speaking, testament to the fact that his oratory was a key factor in the rise of the National Socialist Party. The enforced silence and confinement gave Hitler time for introspection. The outlet for his thoughts now came through the pen.
The German state, the Bible of the Nazis.
He didn't actually think until the putsch, it doesn't seem to us, that he was the chosen one. he was the Messiah, it's only at his time in Landsberg that he actually realizes, my God, I am he, and is somehow liberated into becoming what he does in fact become.
He served less than a year of his sentence. He served with Rudolf Hess, amongst others, and he used the time to write Mein Kampf.
Democracy is a monstrosity, born of filth and fire.
It's interesting that Hitler decided when he was sent off to prison in 1924 that he would take this opportunity to sit back and write a book about his experiences, how he reached the point he'd reached, why he had the beliefs that he did. But it was very important for him to do that, I think, to sit back and take stock of, how he arrived there.
Hitler's title for the original manuscript was My 4.5 Year Struggle Against Lies, Cowardice and Stupidity, a final reckoning with those who would destroy the German nation. Well, his publishers recommended to him he go for something that might be a little snappier and catchier for the market, so they extrapolated the two words, my struggle, Mein Kampf.
The really interesting part of it is the famous 5th chapter, which is a theory of propaganda. The rest of it are really a relation of emotional spasms. It's not a recipe for a system as, for example, Marx is with the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital.
God has made Germans a race of supermen. Almighty God, bless our German blood.
The publishers shifted 300,000 copies, and many more, for perhaps obvious reasons after that. Big book, the original thing, hefty volume. You're talking about 600 pages.
The writing of Mein Kampf fueled his desire for power and the need to lead Germany. However, Hitler knew he would need a different route to domination, but without being able to speak publicly, it would have to wait.
Stopping him from speaking was going to keep the peace. He was regarded as an influential speaker.
I think you were looking for an explanation for why it took a long time for the party to revive again and for the public to really take it seriously again. It was a ban on his speaking.
He alone in Germany is not allowed to speak. So he used that as propaganda, really, to attack the Weimar government for censorship.
In 1927, the ban on Hitler's public speaking was relaxed and later lifted completely. Once more, Hitler took to the stage.
Something about his performances, something about that which really attracted people, like modern-day pop stars.
There are people who do appear to have been mesmerized by him.
As soon as he could start speaking, you have that run-up to the successful parliamentary elections in the late 1920s. When I look at Hitler on a stage, I think of him as being in a political theatre, but I don't believe that what he says is great oratory.
At the time of Hitler's silence, Germany began to see a certain recovery. Thanks to American investment, unemployment was declining and the economy was improving. A sense of optimism rippled through the German nation.
A lot of Americans invested, so Germany looked as if it was prospering by 1928.
The National Socialists could have been banished to the history books as a marginal far-right political party, with their eccentric leader and the failed beer hall putsch of 1923. However, fate dealt them a favourable hand.
The post-war economic recovery under the Weimar Republic, which was genuine enough while it lasted, that had collapsed as a direct result of the Wall Street crash in New York.
It was a saying of the time, New York sneezed, London caught cold, and Germany nearly died of influenza.
The implications of the crash would eventually lead the National Socialist Party to total power.
The continuity of the Great Depression was absolutely critical. 7 million men became unemployed. There seemed to be no lifting. And once you got the worker in the dole queue, you had him as a potential Nazi, a potential stormtrooper.
What further measures would be imposed on the German population to consolidate the Nazis' power, and what terror would be unleashed before the dramatic toppling of this evil regime?
Okay. Kind of ended in a weird spot for me, but that's okay. All right. So there is something interesting here. So we hear about his attempt to take over the government, right? Failed. Why did that not go well for him? Why was he kind of unable to overthrow the government? He thought something was going to happen and then it didn't. Avitesh. Yeah. Those cops ruin everything, hey? Yeah, they opened fire. What did he think was going to happen? Yeah, right. He thought that the police and the government workers would be sympathetic to the Nazi cause. They would see the Nazis marching up and they would welcome them in, right? But of course, whoops, not true, right? The cops don't sympathize with the Nazis, neither do the government workers. They get machine gunned. He goes to jail. Whoops, right? But there is something very interesting that I thought, I was thinking about media platforms, okay? And part of what's happening here is that, Hitler is kind of able to build this momentum, right? He's able to build a movement, and he's able to do it with his words, right? He's able to do it with what he says. And a lot of what he says is kind of not true, right? He's railing against the Jews for all the problems of Germany. He's getting angry that, the government stabbed the people in the back. Neither of those things are true, right? They're conspiracy theories. There's no evidence, there's no truth to those things. But he's spreading them and he's kind of building a movement, right? And interestingly, what happens is that after the Munich putsch, or the beer hall putsch, whatever you want to call it, he's thrown in jail, but he's also banned from public speaking. And I was thinking, oh, that's kind of interesting, because we had a similar thing happen with Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump has been banned from Twitter, which for him is effectively a ban on public speaking, right? We've barely heard from him since that happened. And I wanted to ask you guys about the responsibility that media platforms have for moderating content. Do you think that Instagram or TikTok or Twitter or Facebook or any way that you can kind of express yourself or post your views to the greater world, do you think those platforms have a responsibility to monitor what you put out there and maybe remove content that is untrue? Or do you think it's up to users to be able to tell the difference between what information is good and bad and what they should or shouldn't believe? What do you think about that? We could think about Trump. We could also think about, there's a very current example right now with Spotify. Have you heard about the Spotify thing? Yeah? What's going on with Spotify there, Ben? Oh, okay. Spotify had so Joe Rogan, you know who Joe Rogan is? Podcaster, very popular, millions of people follow Joe Rogan. Joe has been accused of spreading misinformation, particularly with regard to COVID-19. Sort of rock and roll legend, Neil Young, said to Spotify, did I say Spotify? Yeah. Said to Spotify, look, I don't like that Joe Rogan is spreading misinformation. Either take his podcast down or get my music off your service. And so Spotify said, okay, we'll take your music off our service. So kind of lost that ultimatum, I guess. Um, so again, this is a good question though. What is the responsibility of media, maybe even especially social media, to monitor what people put out? Do they have a responsibility there, or do we have the responsibility to not look at stuff that is not right or not correct? What do you think? Anna, what do you think about that?
I think it's maybe our responsibility.
Okay.
I mean, we can see a fake news in Twitter or in Facebook or whatever.
Yeah.
And we decided either we believe it, like we like our name or something, or if we search about it, we investigate.
Okay. So we certainly have the ability to do that, right? We can certainly Google things and search out information. So we can do it, and so we should do our own checking. Okay. Okay. Ben, what do you think?
I think it depends on how old the information is.
How hardcore did you say?
Yeah.
Okay. In what way?
For Trump, right? You're making the public think that everything is kind of like lies. All media is lying to the public through like Twitter and all that kind of things. And then, well, some people may not be able to tell whether or not it's actually from the truth.
Yeah.
So I think Twitter just stepped in to like stop it from spreading.
Okay, so it kind of depends on how significant the misinformation is. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay.
There's some people that might be not be able to do research further into these kind of things. And
Right.
so maybe social media can just stop them before it becomes so hardcore.
Yeah. It's certainly possible for them to do it, right? Like there's algorithms you can put in place. People don't have to search through everything themselves, right? But it's possible for them to moderate,
Yeah.
right? Avitesh, what do you think?
I think like Instagram and all should monitor what people post.
Think they should monitor?
Yeah.
Why do you think that?
Because like what happened with Donald Trump, he caused a lot of hate and the riots, you know?
Yeah.
Because you can't trust an individual, not only at the whole world, not to post something wrong on social media. Someone's going to try and post something.
Right? Yeah. There's always a few.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they should monitor.
Okay. Ryan, what do you think?
Like you said, some still monitor and people can just post whatever they want.
That's true. And yeah, and the question is, should they be able to, right?
It depends. Like they have to create a system.
Yeah.
Control these kind of
True. And those things are possible, right? It's possible to create that system. Because kind of what we're talking about here, if this was a spectrum, what we're talking about is, fully anyone can say whatever they want about anything over here, right? And on the other side is kind of full censorship, right? Where someone or something, usually it's the government, but something is controlling what people say, right? And certain things can be said and certain things cannot be said, right? And of course the Chinese government and maybe the North Korean government is more extreme, but they're very good at censoring things, right? There's stuff that you can't search out on the internet, right? You can't find it. There's things that you're not really allowed to post or allowed to say, right? So the government is saying these are things that you can't say. And so yeah, it's kind of figuring out where we kind of sit on that spectrum, right? Do we just let people say whatever they want and it's up to people to figure it out? Or do we want some control? Or do we want like full full state control. I'm assuming we don't, but maybe we do. Regina, what do you think? Yeah. Yeah, and once upon a time, you know, the media landscape has changed so much, right? Once upon a time, well, think back to the 1920s, right? If you wanted to get your message out, right, you had newspaper. A little later, you had radio, which was really cool. Or you could stand on a street corner like Hitler was on a box and talk to people just out in the open, right, on the side of the street. That was kind of all that you could do. And, you know, for the newspaper and for the radio, there were gatekeepers, right? So if you wanted to publish something in the paper, the editor had to approve it, right? And if what you wrote was crazy nonsense, the editor would look at it and say, we're not printing this, right? The newspaper is going to look, we're going to look like we're insane, right? That we're incompetent. We're not printing that, right? And so the editor would keep the gate, right? They would close the gate to anything that was poorly researched or, you know, not factual or just badly written. The editor would throw it out, right? Same thing with radio. Radio station producers wouldn't just let anyone get in front of the microphone and say what they wanted. They controlled what was said, right? And, you know, maybe they censored some things that they didn't have to, but they kind of protected people from craziness and lies, or at least hopefully they did. But now, of course, we're in a period of history where anyone can get out there and say anything, right? Look what's happening. Look what's happening on the screen right now, right? Do I not basically have my own television channel? Is there not like a television studio in my laptop? I have my own show. Take that, Trevor Noah. No, he's great. I have my own show. I'm the star of my own show. I can say whatever I want. I can put whatever I want on the screen. And millions of people can see it. Nobody's watching, sadly. But in theory, millions of people could see this, right? And so that's unbelievable, right? That's an incredible technological advancement. But there's no gatekeeper, right? There's no editor, no producer, nobody telling me what I can and can't say, right? YouTube is there, and if I say anything, you know, wildly racist, I'm sure YouTube will take my video down, or if I broadcast anything copyright. But nobody's stopping me. I can say whatever I want, kind of, right? Which in some ways is incredible and amazing, right? But in other ways, there's nobody to kind of keep the bad information out, right? And so, like Anna said, it's really about, it puts a lot more responsibility on us, right? To be able to determine what's good information and what's bad. But then, like Ben mentioned, it's tough because some people may not really know how to do that, right? All of the stuff around COVID, you know, understanding COVID is like, you know, pretty intense epidemiology, right? Like you really need to know about infectious diseases and how they work, and you need to really understand that stuff. But certainly we all understand more now than we did 2 years ago, but none of us are really experts, right? And we kind of struggle to understand viruses and how they mutate and how they're transmitted and how infection works, and that's all pretty complicated stuff. And so we can research it, but we really don't know what we're doing, do we? I don't, right? I'm struggling to like really understand what's going on, but it's been tough, right? Because information changing, science is changing, the virus is changing. It's tough to keep up, isn't it? And so, yeah, it's difficult for us to do our own research sometimes, especially when it's a complicated thing, right? But again, do we want to silence huge amounts of people for maybe saying the wrong thing or saying something that's not popular. And again, that's going to happen in Nazi Germany, right? It's going to be, dangerous to say the wrong thing, right? In Soviet Russia, particularly under Joseph Stalin, there's going to be heavy censorship, right? If you're overheard saying something critical about the Soviet government, you're going to get a visit from KGB agents, right? And they're going to take you to an undisclosed location, and they're going to ask you some very uncomfortable questions in a very uncomfortable way, right? And so, full censorship is not great, right? But neither is, anyone can say anything, right? And it's very interesting to see that both Hitler and Trump basically had their right to public speaking taken away from them because it's powerful, right? And so we don't have any more time to talk about that, but something that maybe I encourage you to think about is, what is the responsibility of social media platforms or just media platforms in general to moderate content? And someone like Spotify, I imagine there's no Neil Young fans in the room here. In fact, has anyone ever heard of him before? I didn't think so. But did they make the right call, right? If Joe Rogan is spreading misinformation, should Spotify, just sort of close their eyes and say, oh, well, I'm sure it's fine? Or does Spotify have a responsibility to say, look, Joe, if you can't get your facts straight, your podcasts are out of here, right? You're not broadcasting them on our platform. What's their responsibility, right? They're certainly paying Joe a heck of a lot of money to put his podcast on the service, but what should they do? Think about it. It's an important question. Okay, that's it for today. Tomorrow we'll have a quiz. Now remember, there's some online people, so I think it'll be Peter and Alicia. You'll be online, so I'll deal with you first. And for people who are in class, we'll start writing a little bit later. So let's, class starts at 10:05. How about 10:45? Okay, so you guys can come in a little bit late if you want, or you can come in here and study if you want, but we'll start the quiz at 10:45. Before that, I'll be dealing with the online people. So I won't be in this room, so don't panic if you come in and I'm not here. Just come on in, sit down, study or relax, whatever you want to do, and then we'll start at 10:45. Coolio? Okay, that is it. See you all tomorrow. Have a nice afternoon.